The next issue that comes out of complex trauma is pretty well everybody coming out of complex trauma has boundary issues. So there's two parts to boundaries. There are boundaries that basically define what love looks like. So a boundary is a rule that says we're not going to lie, we're not going to cheat, we're not going to hit others, we're not going to steal from others, we're not going to say unkind, hateful words. Those are all boundaries that define what love looks like, because they're trying to keep life healthy and keep relationships healthy. The other part of boundaries is, how close do I let you into my life? Am I responsible for your needs and problems or not? Am I responsible for some, but only to a degree? You're responsible for most of it. How enmeshed am I? How distant am I? How close do I let pushy people into my life? Can I say no to them? Can I demand privacy? Can I cut people out of my life? Boundaries are all about managing relationships and the closeness of relationships and how relationships operate. People coming out of complex trauma, they didn't have either set of boundaries modeled for them very well. There was lots of unfair, unloving, lots of hurtful words all the time. There was lots of violation of involvement in people's lives. So people coming out of complex trauma, some didn't have any boundaries at all. Do whatever you want. Others had super rigid boundaries, tons and tons of rules that there was no bends, there was no exceptions. Others, boundaries weren't about what was best for everybody in the family. Boundaries were only about what was best for the person in authority, what they liked. So often the boundaries were unfair for everybody else. The boundaries weren't about love. The boundaries actually hurt other people. The boundaries actually restricted people from having fun, having their needs met. And so to the child, boundaries in that environment were bad things. Boundaries made life worse, more painful. And then for some children in complex trauma, boundaries were inconsistent. One day this was the rule, the next day that rule didn't apply, it depended on the parent's mood. For others, boundaries had inconsistent consequences. So one day if you broke the rule, this was the consequence. Other days if you broke that rule, different consequence, depending on the parent's mood. And then for others, some days if you broke the rule, the consequence was over the top. You were grounded for a month. You had all kinds of privileges taken away. It was cruel. So consequences didn't match the crime. Then for others, the family was enmeshed. You were responsible for everybody else's emotions, everybody else's behavior. You weren't allowed privacy. You weren't allowed to have a natural bubble that said, I don't want you into my space. You didn't know where you ended and where somebody else's began because you were so intertwined. Some families said we're so close as a family because we do everything together. But that was actually enmeshment. That wasn't healthy. Or some families, nobody was involved in anybody's life. Everybody just lived solo existence. Everybody doing their own thing. You did not know how to interact and help each other meet each other's needs. So then many children, because all children have a natural sense of a bubble, if somebody got into their bubble without permission, they would respond and say, no, that's my space. That's my room. The door's shut. Stay out. Demand privacy. They would then get punished for that. So peace in the family was only maintained not by healthy boundaries. Peace was maintained by conforming to unhealthy boundaries. That's what they knew. So to be a good child meant you had to do what dad wanted, even if it wasn't for your best, even if it wasn't that everybody's needs matter the same amount. Conforming to the boundaries of the authority was all that mattered. So boundary issues, and we do a whole week in our program on boundaries because this is such an important topic and so difficult to get all the nuances of boundaries sorted out in your life. So many people from complex trauma struggle with procrastination. They delay or they put off doing tasks until the last minute or past their deadline, even though they know it's going to lead to even more painful consequences down the road. They'd rather have instant relief of the stress than worry about the long-term consequences. So it's important to understand that in complex trauma, procrastination is part of the flight response. I can't deal with the problem. I don't have the tools. I don't have the support. I can't deal with the stress. So let's find a way to avoid it. And so that became a survival skill as a way to try and deal with stress. And so people do it still today whenever they get stressed, trying to avoid stress, because that's where their brain goes. You can't deal with it. You don't have the tools. Just avoid. So there's other reasons besides lack of tools. Many children coming out of complex trauma procrastinate today because as a child they were afraid to ask for help because nobody would help them. They were made to feel like a burden or a pain. So if I can't deal with the problem today and I'm afraid to ask for help, let's procrastinate. Others, there's a fear of failure. If I do this job, I'm probably going to fail. So let's just put this job off as long as we want. So there's that huge fear, shame element. Because if I fail, it's going to expose how terrible I am. So let's procrastinate. Many are still in their limbic brain. So all I care about is instant gratification. Anything that's going to take work, anything that might be boring, anything that's going to be drudgery, I'm going to avoid. So let's just live instant gratification. So as long as you're in limbic brain, you will continue to go to procrastination. Some people procrastinated because as a child, that's how they got the attention of their parents, by putting things off to the last minute, by being late. Then their parents got upset, but they connected with their parents. Some began to rationalize that it was a good thing to procrastinate because they worked better under pressure. And so they just procrastinate now, thinking stress helps them perform better. Some developed a fear of becoming a responsible adult. So if I do these jobs, others are going to expect me to do these jobs and hold me to a higher standard. So let's just procrastinate and not do them. Others, if I accomplish tasks, I start to get noticed. I can't be invisible anymore. So let's procrastinate. Others, perfectionism. If I can't do it perfectly, then that means I'm a failure. So if I can't do it perfectly, procrastinate. Others, they procrastinated because it was too hard to focus on getting a task done. Life was so chaotic. There was so much danger distracting them all the time that they could just never totally focus on a task. And so it looked like procrastination all the time. For others, life for them was always chaotic, always unpredictable. That was their normal. And so now they continue to kind of live that way, to get healthy habits, healthy routines, to stick at tasks and do them from start to finish. That was never part of their life. And so they've never developed the ability to do that. And then sadly, some were spoiled. And so they procrastinate because somebody else will do it for me. Somebody else will bail me out. I don't have to discipline myself. I don't have to work hard. I don't have to do stuff I don't feel like doing because somebody else will eventually do it for me. That was part of being spoiled. And then if I don't do it, well, I won't go through bad consequences because somebody will bail me out of the bad consequences. So procrastination becomes their way of life. Others have a very strong internal critic, which basically says, doesn't matter what you do, I will find fault with it. You can't win. So just put tasks off because I will just end up failing somehow, not doing it well enough, and the internal critic will be overwhelming for me. Others are getting to the point of burnout. Their sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems have been out of balance for so long that they are getting more and more tired, more exhausted, more overwhelmed, that they just start procrastinating because they just do not have the energy to do tasks. And then some fall into addiction. Addiction now becomes the main focus of their life. It consumes more and more energy and time. Everything else gets pushed aside. Some fall into depression. They just lose motivation for life. Others develop oppositional defiance disorders. They just rebel against being responsible, against authority telling them what to do. And so they procrastinate whenever they have to be responsible or somebody tells them what to do. Self-sabotage becomes part of some people's life. So whenever things are going well, they sabotage it, and one way is to procrastinate. ADHD. Many people with ADHD struggle with a poor concept or sense of time. And so they can get doing all kinds of different things and lose track of time, and it looks like procrastinating. So procrastination is a huge issue. And what I find so important for people to understand is that don't beat up the child that was trying to survive. Procrastination was the only way they knew to try and avoid getting hurt. Learn to meet with that child, care for that child, help that child learn tools to deal with life besides the tool of procrastination. And we've talked about the next one already. They shut down their internal alarms, their intuition, their gut, their conscience, their emotions. So we have 3 alarm systems. Intuition, so neuroception, we sense, we get vibes when something isn't dangerous. So you have a child who you put them 2 people they don't know, they'll go to one, but they'll stay away from the other. Why? Because their vibes pick up. One is safe, one is not. Then we have our emotions. They are reporting back to us all the time, whether something is safe, whether something is not. And then we have our conscience that is telling us if we are going into unhealthy behaviors, unloving behaviors, or we're still in healthy behaviors. What happens in complex trauma? You shut down your intuition, your gut. You shut down your emotions. You shut down your conscience. Now you go into adult life with those shut down and you walk into danger. All of the maladaptations, all of these coping things that you had to do to survive, they kept you safe. They got some of your needs met. But now 20, 30 years later, you realize you've built thousands of programs about how to cope that are actually unhealthy. But those programs are now in your subconscious brain. They operate on autopilot. You are doing stuff without even being aware that you are doing it. And again, it might give you immediate short-term safety and good feelings, but long-term painful consequences. So you learn, don't be authentic, don't trust, don't be vulnerable, keep secrets, manipulate, all kinds of maladaptations. Now, 20, 30 years later, that prevents a healthy relationship. That hurts the people you love. So recovery is bringing all of these subconscious programs to the conscious level, beginning to understand the patterns of how they operate, beginning to concentrate on changing the patterns, learning new tools. That takes time. That takes a lot of concentrated effort, but it is possible. So be aware that people coming out of complex trauma have a lot of stuff in their subconscious brain, programs that are basically maladaptations. Recovery is changing all of those, and that takes a lot of work. Now, how do you get a subconscious program to the conscious level? Sometimes you get it by learning. And that's part of what we do in our LIFT program is tons of learning, and that brings a whole bunch of subconscious to the conscious. But even sometimes with all kinds of learning, there's still stuff in your subconscious. How do you become aware of it? This is not fun, but this is part of recovery. It doesn't become conscious until it gets triggered in an intimate relationship, in a life event today. And all of a sudden, you're going along, doing really well. Something triggers a subconscious program. You go into a world of pain. Your brain wants to immediately go back to old tools. You feel like you're regressing. Don't beat yourself up. Realize, oh, something just I just became aware of what's this about. Be curious about it and begin to understand. Thank you for that trigger because it just made me aware of a program I wasn't even aware of before. Now I can begin to change it and growth can happen. So usually for people, the initial part of recovery, growth comes about by learning. Later in recovery, most growth comes about by painful triggers. We don't like that part of growth, but it is a key part of recovery. So those are the coping characteristics that so many people have as they come out of complex trauma. So once again, I hope this is helpful to you. I do not want you to walk away just saying, oh, I'm so screwed up. This is so overwhelming. I'm wanting to give you hope. I'm wanting to help you begin to realize this is what's been happening in your subconscious. Becoming aware of it is step one, and it can feel overwhelming. But as you apply tools, as you form healthy connections, and you start to see change, you will see these characteristics begin to be less and less. We've had clients who come back a year later and they tell us, man, first time I was here, I had all of these characteristics. Now I've only got like 30 of these characteristics. Yes, I still can get triggered and I am tempted to go back to the other characteristics because they're so familiar to me, but I just don't struggle with them like I used to struggle with them. And if I do struggle with them, it's not as intensely and it doesn't last as long. I can work through it very quickly and get back to a healthy place. So growth is possible. That's what I want you to see.